we are. When the Buddha taught, he just sat someplace. And sometimes it happened that people asked questions, and when that happened, he answered them. And sometimes it happened that people didn't ask questions, and when that happened, he just sat there. Seems a sensible way to do it.
Can I assume that was an invitation for questions?
It was.
So, as a woman, I look around. There's a lot of male teachers, a lot of male deities, and especially in our culture, a common way for us to perceive ability is when people are kind of reciting information and showing knowledge, and I find that a lot of women tend to have kind of a different path than, I don't know, absorbing and reciting. I think that we tend to take the information and use it in our practice more than we do discussing facts and debating, and comparing and contrasting Chandrakirti to Nagarjuna and so forth. Could you give some advice on how to gain confidence as a woman when a lot of our mentors and teachers may have different experiences from ours?
Yes. Cultural. What you're running into is a cultural phenomena. At the time of Buddha, in that culture, women were definitely thought of in a certain way. And so they thought of themselves in that way. And so they behaved in that way. Men also thought of themselves in a certain way, and therefore behaved in that way. So the teachings were adapted to that culture. Among the Tibetans, there was also a great deal of division in how men and women saw each other. Part of this was a time pre-contraception, where women did not have the ability to choose whether or not to bear children if by chance they weren't choosing celibacy. And even if they were, it can be difficult to enforce celibacy. Rape exists. People get pregnant from it. Now that there is available contraception, there is really no reason that we need to continue to be conditioned into certain roles. We're quite free to find whatever roles are most comfortable for us. The men are also conditioned, and they're conditioned into having to compete with each other. It's very, very hard to have a room full of men who are not competing with each other on some level. Dharma is a way past your conditioning by practice. Both your conditioning to compete, to be first, to be smartest, and your conditioning to put others first. All the conditioning. You are more than what you were conditioned to be as a child. We have our species conditioning. We have our culture's conditioning, we have our family's conditioning, we have our experiential conditioning. I think your question was how to get free of that. By practice. I'm not sure. I managed to miss the conditioning to be shy of my knowledge. If you have been conditioned not to stand forth, I'm not sure how you get out of that, because I don't have the experience of having to get out of that. These are very good questions because the times are changing. In Tibet, their women teachers were very rare, more common than they are now in India. And there have been times in India where they were more common than they are now. At the time of Naropa and Tilopa, when Marpa brought the Dharma up to Tibet, and at the times of Guru Rinpoche, that was a time of considerable freedom for women. There was a new middle class. There was a leisure among common people, not just the aristocrats. Aristocrats have too much responsibility to have leisure, and poor folks are too busy looking for food. It's the middle class that gets the leisure. At the time of Tilopa and Naropa, there were probably as many female teachers as male. They weren't remembered in the way the males were when the Dharma went up to Tibet, which was a very misogynist culture. And it was Tibet that preserved the Dharma. Up in Zhangzhung and with the Bon, the female lineage has survived better than it has in central Tibet. The Karma Kargyu and the Gelug have hardly any of it. Karma Kargyu had some female Togdens, but none of them made it out of Tibet. The Nyingmas have a few, and the Bon have a bunch in the lineage. This is an exploration as the Dharma comes west. You do your prayers in English. This is a big change. It's up to the next generation, to you who are young, to find the answers to this. Best guys can give you. As far as I know, the way to get past your conditioning to be humble, nyamchung, is to simply go like this to it. Stand up anyway, even if it scares you. Do it a few times and it gets easier, so I'm told. Very few Tibetan women are willing to stand up. And yet a great many of them seem to like hiding behind me when I stand up, because I don't have that problem. They don't dare because a good woman is humble. Nyamchung. Namchung sees herself as small, literally. They don't much like that, but they're unwilling to cross the cultural phenomena. So they'll push me forward more easily than a Tibetan. Oh, well, it's a foreigner. I guess they can do that. So maybe we're going to be the bridge. They'd never have opened a Shedra or let women into the scholar program of a Shedra, and some women are quite scholarly. It's not just the guys that like that stuff. Unless the Westerners yelled at them a lot, which they did. Yell at them for the right things. Don't get distracted by the little stuff. It's up to you guys, next generation, and you guys, the generation after that. Yeah, you see who I'm looking at, you kids. To stand up and take your place in the Dharma and in the world, and not be all humble just because you think a good woman is nice. Does this answer your question in any way? I stood up in my own way, as did Sultra Malioni in her way, and others of my generation in their way, but Firstin is a funny position. You gotta actually be like a guy or you can't get in. 'Tis the next generation that says, no, you adapt to us, not we adapt to you. And it's the generation after that that says, what are you all on about? We've always been here. Standing up, doing whatever it is our nature to do without the imposition of cultural good girl. Yeah, put that out. You don't need it. So how to get loose of conditioning? Fastest way is Dzogchen, also known as Mahamudra. Two different methods do the same thing, both really fast. Second fastest way is Tantra. Third fastest way is scholarliness. Scholarliness, they say, by studying the sutras, in fact, using the 6 paramitas as a map for your practice and practicing in that way takes 400 lifetimes. Of course, they never say if you're in your 399th or not. You just don't know. Tantra takes 1 lifetime. Dzogchen doesn't take any time at all. It's in the now. This now, where you come to recognize your own innate, unshakable, unlosable, unfuck-upable, natural state of enlightenment. It's too easy for some people. If it's too easy for you, let me teach you some Tantra. That's more effortful. And to become a scholar and study the sutras, following the 6 paramitas as your map of how to practice, is even more laborful. But do the one that you like. Because if you don't like it, you won't do it. And if you don't do it, it won't work. So pick the one you like. Did I answer your question well enough? Other questions?
First, thank you for coming here. I really appreciate your presence here and your teachings this weekend. I just recently came out as transgender, and as I've been looking at Dharma practice and looking at the lineage and tradition and all of that, it's hard to see gender variance, gender fluidity, gender nonconformity represented, or to see examples of that. Are there any examples that you're aware of practitioners who have kind of brought gender nonconformity or such onto the path, ways of incorporating that into practice?
Dzongsar Khyentse's been known to teach in drag, and he's very highly respected Tibetan. May I ask a personal question?
Sure.
Which way are you going? From which to which? I can't tell. You're pretty midline at the moment.
I was assigned male at birth, and
you're moving towards female.
yeah,
You going to go all the way for female, or you think you might stop in the middle?
that's an open question.
Be interesting to see where your comfort zone is. I've always told people I'm a gay guy. That's where my comfort zone lands. I'm pretty out there and pretty masculine, but I love makeup and hairdos, especially doing them on others. There's nothing so much fun as doing somebody's makeup. I was in theater, I was a makeup artist for a while. It was fun. I love to cook, but I do not appear to be in the least bit subservient. And I tend to be somewhat promiscuous, as most gay guys are, when young. Now I'm kind of old and lazy, so I don't get around the way I used to. Isn't it nice that we can just find our own comfort level with whoever we are? So you can think of me as a drag queen when I'm dressed girly. I like that fluidity that we have, but realize that to truly have the fluidity that is available to us now, that's based on medical science. Without even the basics of contraception, you can't go female to male, because you're going to be accidentally pregnant, and it's really hard to convince somebody you're a guy when you're given birth. To go male to female, it's more than just growing your hair long and changing your body language. Hormones help. If you take them young enough, they help even more. My daughter at 11 had a couple of kids in her class that were in transition, going one way or the other. I wasn't quite sure on them either which way they were going, from which to which, because you can't always tell where somebody's starting, where they're ending up. Other than Dzongsa Khyentse Rinpoche, I'm trying to think back if there's any more historical examples, because the essence of what we're trying to do is the union of yin and yang within ourselves, the midline. Each one of these thangkas, do you have any thangkas in Yabyama?
All in the back there.
Each one of these thangkas that appears to depict a male and female in union is actually depicting a single entity, one being, not two beings. It is depicting, say, let's talk about primordial Buddha, Kuntuzongpo and Kuntuzongmo. When you see them in union, this is not a male Buddha and a female Buddha. This is a gender-neutral Buddha, and that is how that's symbolized, the union of the two aspects in a single entity. So it is the goal of Tantra to hit midline, to find that balance within yourself. Not everybody makes it, but many of the historical lamas, the male gender ones, within what was possible culturally, were relatively feminine. And many of the female ones in the lineage behaved in quite a masculine manner. You hear about Mandareva, who wandered in the jungles, left the palace, threw away her jewelry, went and lived in a cave. Girls don't do that. Those who are acculturated as good girls don't, anyway. She obviously escaped from the acculturation, and she's thought of so highly because she did. She had an affair with Guru Rinpoche, but when her father invited him to the palace to teach, she didn't go with him. She didn't want to go back to the palace. She visited occasionally. and lived the wild life that she'd chosen. So there are some archetypes that go that way. When you hear about them, sometimes from a male teacher, they are distorted. But many of the great siddhas had female teachers whose names have been forgotten by the guys. We'll fix that over time. We'll get a few female scholars coming up, those who happen to like and want that path, who will go do some historical research and find out what their names were. Tilopa's teacher was a woman he met in a charnel ground. Guru Rinpoche had several such teachers as well. Many of the great ones did. Not all. Milarepa had a single male teacher who was his root guru and another male teacher who was a heart teacher. So once again, now that we can be gender flexible physiologically, because we've got the wherewithal in medical science to do that if the culture doesn't fall down and lose it all soon, it behoves us to blaze a bit of a trail and to be inclusive. Some Tibetan lamas, and I know of a couple of them, are very anti-gay due to their own personal experiences in the monasteries, which, being monasteries, are no better than the Catholic monasteries. They're monasteries. Also, in the Tibetan culture, there is no negative idea about being gay among the common folks and common teachers, most who didn't have their own negative experience and their own prejudice from experience. However, there is a strong moral, not done society line about not talking about sexuality. Even married couples who are hetero do not discuss how they got those babies, or hold hands in public or show affection in public. However, a large proportion of the nuns and the monks form pair bonds and spend their lives together, and nobody asks what they do in those caves. When I got married to two women, my teacher, Wangdor Rinpoche, did the ceremony and then went home and shared the pictures delightedly with everybody, because there's no reason not to talk about a ceremony. Later on, some guy got ticked off at me as a lama and started trying to tell the Tibetans I was gay, thinking that would bother them. And he was quite ostracized for talking about sexuality, which is the not done. So understand this about their culture. They're not against being gay, they're against talking about any kind of sexuality, except when blind drunk in a chung shop. There you can talk about anything. Does this answer your question?
It does, thank you.
Blaze a path. I've always been pretty mid-range bi, but not everybody is. It's a whole scale, from the absolutely hetero to the absolutely gay and every little bit in between. I sort of move between 40 and 60 depending on which culture I'm in. So I tend to prefer guys when I'm in Scandinavia, slight preference for males, and strong preference for females when I'm in the Middle East. Cultural. Did that answer effectively? You know, in Japan, Dharma is different than it is in China, than it is in Thailand, than it is in Ceylon, and than it is in Tibet. And it's going to be different here, too. And you guys are the ones who are going to make it what it becomes. It's okay to throw out the bathwater, but don't throw out the baby. put some time into figuring out which is which. Other questions?
Hello.
Hi.
This is my first time here, so I came on a lucky day, I suppose. I'm kind of a lifelong studier of world religions and ideologies and philosophies, and I've kind of taken from each and applied it to my own life. Obviously, as a woman, my life is different than a man's. I'm half Native American, half Swedish. So I've traveled and I've seen the world and I've seen a lot of suffering. And it kind of spans no matter what your gender or race or ideology is, unfortunately.
Yep.
And at this point in my life, I'm trying to establish something as a way to ease other people's suffering because I just see so much of it and have lived so much of it. And I guess my question is, is there a way to go about that that makes you feel as if you're making a true difference for people?
There are a multitude of ways to go about that. The trick is finding your way, the thing that you have both the talent and ability to do that makes a difference. If you are good at carpentry, perhaps building people houses, you might get involved with Habitat for Humanity, who's done some really good work here and there. But if you're more talented in another area, that wouldn't be the way you would go. So the trick is how to find out how you can make a difference. There isn't a one-size-fits-all here, because we all have different abilities and talents to share. In order to be able to find that out, you've got to get out of your own way. Attempting to help others with a holding pattern point of view as to what is helpful and what is harmful is dangerous. Look at the missionaries helping the poor savages. Look at what was done to the Native Americans in order to mainstream the children. You can look through history and see 1,000 helping that harms. They're actually trying to help the poor women not to create the karma to go to hell from having had an abortion by making them illegal everywhere. Yeah, that's what they think. You gotta get out of your own way with your own suppositions of right and wrong and good and bad and what's helpful and not helpful, because other people have a different idea. And you can do a friggin' lot of harm helping in the wrong way. Look at history. Go on. Look at some of the Tibetan teachings that have been given by teachers fresh out of the monastery who have no idea about the context they're teaching in, who actually give harmful teachings to those who follow them. You ever see that? That's where you give the teaching that's meant for 14-year-old monks to women who are married. Bad idea. Fucks them up. Especially if they have guru yoga and feel they have to believe you. They don't know any better because they received that teaching when they were beginning, and they don't understand that it might be different under the circumstances. There are well-trained but not well-realized teachers sent here and there, and they do get into trouble. Don't automatically take as your guru the first Tibetan teacher you meet. You're supposed to watch them for 3 years before you even consider making that decision. You can learn from them. But the Buddha said, weigh my teaching like buying gold in Benares. Anybody who's ever been to Indian bazaars understands this exactly. So you've got to clear your suppositions away in order to find your way to be most effective in changing the world for the better. Will you be involved in ecology, in culture preservation, in contraception being available because we're friggin' overpopulated? Where will you go to find that out? Understand what your ignorance is made of, because all of us have ignorance. What your personal, possibly quite incorrect belief systems about what's good and what's bad are made of. Find that out by following one of them home. Finding out, seeing for yourself where it lives. You're always thinking. Your belief systems, your values, your judgments, your personal judgmentalism, and yeah, we've all got it, are made of thought, feeling, and perception. But mostly thought. It's an idea. This is right, this is wrong. Pick an idea, any idea, and follow it home. Find out where it's happening. See your mind with your mind. By seeing your mind beyond all its thinking, feeling, and perceiving, seeing it as it is, seeing it for yourself, seeing your real self. You will come to know experientially, not just because I said so, that all thoughts arise in mind and dissolve in mind and have never been made of anything other than mind. Check up on a bunch of them and see if that's true. Do that for a while. And if and you keep doing that, you'll come to see the world you have created and constructed out of your personal hopes and fears and be able to see past them to what's really there. It's a process. But without that, there is a great deal of danger of our doing something to help the world mistakenly as to what's helpful and what's harmful. Look at history. Lots of examples. Does this answer your question?
It doesn't really, but I appreciate the answer. I guess my question was more, how do you kind of surpass the feeling of, because I don't cling to one ideology or theology or anything.
This is not a theology. I'm suggesting you have a look.
Well, and I've looked, and I've lived a very difficult life, and I thought things were one way, I thought things were this way, and I've learned over the years that that's not at all accurate. But at this point in my life, I just, I see fellow human beings. I don't see you're transgender, you're male, you're female, whatever, and it's more of just an overwhelming feeling of, even if I contribute in ways that are helpful or in a way that somebody feels would be best to help them, there's still this overwhelming feeling of, is anything I'm doing making a difference, because the world is just so immersed in its own suffering?
Oh, in that case, I have a story for you that may give you the answer you're looking for.
Okay.
There was a little girl, and she lived near the ocean. 7, 8, little one. And there'd been a big storm in the night, and it had washed up hundreds of starfish onto the beach. And the sun was out, and they were drying up on the beach. And there were hundreds and thousands of them all along the beach. And the little girl was walking along the beach, picking up starfish and throwing them back in the water. And picking up the next one and throwing it back in the water. With a great deal of focus, and an adult came to her and said, "You'll never get them all. You're not even making a dent. It doesn't matter what you're doing." And the little girl picked up a starfish and said, "But it matters to this starfish. What I'm doing is very, very important, maybe the most important thing in the whole world for this starfish." And she threw it back in the water and picked up another one and said, "And for this one too." And she threw it back in the water. Does that perhaps answer better what you're asking?
Yes, thank you.
Remember the starfish.
Good morning, Lama Lena.
Good morning.
Always a hoot to see you. I love your unfiltered style. I think we share that in common, that we weren't born with 3-second delays.
Yeah, I'm not really good at filtering. It's not my forte.
I think we're
There's
all okay
much
with it.
finer, more elegant female teachers out there if you, by chance, you want one of those.
Yeah, I think we understand your style and do appreciate it. Most assuredly, these times are changing. We said the same thing back in the 60s and the 70s. And as somebody long in the tooth, I am excited about the young generation. Having been an angry young man, I would say to you, don't let your anger preclude you from being in your community and using your vote. That's as political as I'll get. My point is, the one thing that has not gone out of vogue is anger. The thing, and you and I had a personal conversation about this, and it was profound that sometimes the simplest advice is the best. I asked you about flash anger. You asked me about my meditation. Then you said, recognize it. Recognize your anger. And I thought, how profound is that? Maybe the key is not so much how many times you get angry, but how quickly you can get over it. And the thing I see that's different in anger today, and not being on Facebook and all that, I do understand what the word triggered means, and it seems now people want your anger, that they feed off that. Here's my question. If maybe you can offer some tips on dealing with flash anger, diffusing that, because I think that's part of what divides us. Again, thank you.
We are in the middle of the information revolution. Media, to the extent, social media, to the extent it exists now, has never existed before. New. Anybody remember at least reading about the Industrial Revolution? How about the Agricultural Revolution? Yeah, that was a big one when it happened. Causing plants to grow where we want them to instead of where they want to. Of course, everyone was sick. Nobody noticed it was the lack of sewers. We hadn't invented sewers yet then. So what you have to realize is that we are in a time of upheaval with social media, where things are really changing, and right now, social media is feeding on the popularity of emergency, of fear and anger. Fear and anger is kind of sort of the same emotion. It just flips back and forth. all Eastern direction, all transforms into the mirror-like wisdom of equanimity. You get hits if you alarm people. If somebody is alarmed by what they read on your Twitter, your Facebook, your thing, they share it with friends, and then you get more hits. And if you get more hits, you get more points. And somehow we seem to be collecting those points, and they're actually transferable to goods and money. People send you freebies if you have a certain number of followers. So we actually are being rewarded for alarming people. I think we're going to get past that culturally, but it's going to take another generation that has really grown up with social media and gotten past it, gotten over it, not bothered by it. Right now, there is so much false information out there on the internet. And many people who are winning in our culture, our politics, etc., those who are currently at the top of the heaps, whether they are influencers or politicians or whatever, in whatever aspect, they are winning by twisting information and alarming people. You look at your influencers, how hard they work to keep your interest in whatever their blog is, because they are only as good as the number of followers they have today. You look at your politicians, and you look at the factories in Russia for false information. There are whole villages where the kids are hired to create false posts on social media. They have them in China and Russia because the kids will work cheap. And they're good at it because they're young and they understand the stuff. You'd have to pay them too much in the US and Western Europe. There's a bunch down in Nigeria that are starting to learn how to do this, and in other just technical enough places. It is way out of hand. But do you remember the mess of the Industrial Revolution? You couldn't breathe London. People were dying at the age of 30, worn out from the factory work. The factories burned down. People were chained to their machines. Yeah, we've been through messes before. It takes a couple of generations. All you can do, as far as I know, is to please, please, please don't believe everything you read on the internet. Whether it is political, medical, oh my God, the stuff out there medically. Hey, I'm a doc, I know a little bit. And an herbalist and an alternative medicine practitioner. So I got it all across, and I know the crap. Don't believe what you read and hear. It's rumor and gossip. Please don't kill people because of something you heard on the internet. India has gone nuts. Somebody did a public service announcement about how easy in the main big cities of India it was for a child to be kidnapped. And they staged a fake kidnapping of a kid who on a bicycle, pulled him off, threw him in a van, took him out, and then the kid and the people who did it talked in this video about, what the dangers were and how a kid could have been safer. What that kid should have done, all of this. And the kid talked about what he should have done. Well, somebody cut out just the piece of this video showing the kidnapping, the faked kidnapping, posted it as if it were real, because they got a lot of hits for it. It went viral, in fact. Boy, did they get a lot of hits. They won, saying that there were child kidnappers in South India. and that people should be careful. Well, this went viral because everybody shared it with their friends, because in India they're even less sophisticated than here with internet and social media. The whole thing went viral, and then there were a rash of killings where there was a couple of college kids from the city who came to visit their uncle's farm in the village, and the villagers mobbed and killed them because they were strangers. There's been a whole rash around India of stranger killings from that. Yeah, mess. And it's not that much better here, is it? Yeah. Don't let the anger overtake you so that you harm people. There are meditative methods of working with anger. But the first thing to notice is that you are experiencing a fear-anger sensation, because we don't actually get angry at something that doesn't scare us a little. And we're not actually afraid of something without some kind of anger in there. And women in this culture are often taught to turn their anger into fear, and men are taught to turn their fear into anger. Yeah, I missed that. But anyway, it's a cultural thing that I've seen. When you have such a feeling, the first thing is to notice you're having it. The second thing is to realize that it is all tangled up in a story you're telling yourself about why you're angry. If you can see what the story is made of, the story will release the anger, and the anger will simply be a pure naked emotion. Yeah, I can mention how to do this here, but you actually need to do the retreat and practice it. Maybe 1 year here we'll do working with emotions for the weekend retreat. I think that would be useful to people. You got to strip them naked or you can't work with them. So most of that is about how to get the clothes of the story off the anger, so you can see just the anger as it is. On a Sutrayana level, the simplest thing to do when you notice you are angry is to arise patience, because patience counters anger. What that means is to be patient with the sensation of anger, not be patient with what you're angry at. Be patient about feeling angry. Don't try to fix it right away. Be patient. Let that feeling be okay. You see, we attack others to release our anger, don't we? When you yell at someone or kick the dog, throw dishes, curse, it's to lighten the anger, to relieve it, to release it. You act out to release. If you can be patient with feeling angry, you're taking a really strong step towards not doing harm in the world. Does this answer your question to some extent?
Yes.
Yeah, beware of social media. We don't know how to handle it yet, any more than we knew how to handle coal-burning factories a couple of 100 years ago, which is how we got into this ecological mess. Yeah, you should have seen what the Great Lakes looked like even about 50 years ago, before meth people started trying to clean them up. All the factories just dumped everything in the water. We didn't know. Same for social media. All the ideas get dumped in you. And you don't know which ones are true, which ones are false. There's facts, there's alternative facts, there's the other side's alternative facts. It's almost impossible to determine what's real. And there are little creative bits left out that are really relevant. Next question. Or are we, somebody's watching time here. You know when I'm supposed to be done. You'll wave.
You mentioned emotions, and I'm a therapist, and it's difficult for me to hear some of the Buddhist prescriptions of meditate more or do more mantra when a lot of what I believe is process. Get that thing out and let's look at it and figure it out. Yeah.
Point one are not quite understanding the Buddhist process.
Please help me understand. Thank you.
It is not a denial of emotions, and the idea is not to become bland and stop feeling. That is a misunderstanding. Yes, there is a mantra that if you are so overwhelmed by an emotion in a given moment that you can't move, and you're in the middle of the street and you really do need to move, that you can do to tone it down a peg, but that's a Band-Aid. That's to be used in a temporary emergency situation. Working with emotions, now Westerners will process them. We will free them using a method of seeing them and not minding them and totally feeling them, rather than explaining them with words. We actually take the words off them so you can feel them raw and naked. Westerners tend to add words as part of processing them, but my experience is you never get to the end of that, because there's always another emotion and another process and another emotion and another process, and it almost perpetuates itself. My experience, but I'm not a processor. So it may be that I am mistaken here, and for many people, processing them may be effective. What works for me is stripping them naked and having them raw, which is not what most people think of as Buddhist, because everybody thinks, oh, Buddhism, Om Shanti, Om, peaceful, bland, nothing. Nuh-uh. Look at the Tantra. Look at the colors and the blazing flames. This is not bland. Peacefulness, peace of mind is a misnomer, because you are not rejecting anything that is part of the vitality of life. You are simply learning not to be caught in it. Equanimity is not lack of emotion. Equanimity is not minding having emotions. When we act out our emotions to our detriment, such as allow our fear to stop us from doing something we'd like to do, or follow our anger into harming someone else, we're doing that to avoid feeling those things. If I run away from what scares me, it's so I won't be afraid. It doesn't work. It chases you. When I was a child, my mother had a friend who was afraid to drive at night, so she didn't. After a time, she became wholly afraid to drive. So she didn't. After a time, she became afraid to go out alone. So she didn't. After a time, she became afraid to go out at all, so she stayed home. After a time, she became afraid to go into the basement, so she didn't. After a time, she became afraid to leave the bedroom, so she didn't. After a time, she became afraid to get out of bed, so she didn't. At that point, she was hospitalized. Trying to not be afraid. Equanimity is not caring if you're afraid. Does this in some way explain? Yeah, people who come new to Buddhism in the West and haven't met it in its home, there are certain things. For example, a monk is taught to always appear peaceful to lay people, not to always be peaceful, but not to wash their underwear in public. Don't wash the monastery's underwear in public. Always appear peaceful and gentle to the lay folk. You want to fight, wait till the gate's closed. People misunderstand then the affect that Tibetan monks go around with as being the practice, the real practice. No, it's a showing. You see, the monastery lives by donation, which means the lay people need to think they have something worth supporting, which they do, but it's not necessarily visible in that way. This is a demonstrating that there's something here method. Tantrikas, who are not all monks, but are some monks, are pretty damn crazy. They are not necessarily peaceful. Other questions? Or did you want to ask further on this one?
Lama Lena, we're getting closer to the end of the session. I would like to ask just one question.
Yes.
Could you just describe a little bit about your work that you do in Sopema with the nuns? You were talking a little bit about the support of nuns and stuff like that. Could you maybe talk about your efforts here in the States in relationship with supporting the nuns there in Sopema?
In India, monasteries often receive the donations of locals. Monks are highly respected. Monks do ceremony, and they specialize in ceremony such as death ceremonies, removal of demon ceremonies, prayers and chants. A monastery is a storage device for Dharma. The nuns, however, tend to actually practice much more than the monks, who are more involved and are committed to doing certain ceremonial things every day, involving making the tormas and the gestures and the singing and the chanting and the reciting. The nuns, who are not supported by the society, as the monks are, do not have to spend their time praying for someone's business. So they go off in caves and practice the Dharma for the sake of all sentient beings. Unfortunately, a lot of them end up breaking rocks on the road for 6 months out of the year to support this, because they're not supported. They don't get sent a lot of money to pray for my business, pray for my wealth, pray that I have sons, you know, the things that traditionally a Tibetan monastery is asked to pray for. So I have thinking that practice is really where it's at, being a Westerner and all, and a yogi. I was raised up in the caves with the yogis, so my take on Dharma is non-monastic. Mostly yogis and yoginis. And I like practice. I think it works. I highly recommend it. But for those of us who are at the time in our life where we don't have time to go off into the mountains and make long retreats, to practice day in, day out, day and night. In those circumstances, one of the things that we do is we put a Westerner who's got a career and a family and a mortgage together with a Tibetan who doesn't have those impediments and is practicing full time, so that they both get the realizations of the practice and they both eat, which is necessary in order to practice. I had one nun who thought, you know, I really don't care that much about what food tastes like. I'm just going to live on a handful of white rice every day. And nearly died of malnutrition, berry. Me explaining that, no, you have to eat more than a handful of rice. I don't care if you don't care what it tastes like. Eat vegetables and protein. After I spent all my money getting her diagnosed, I hadn't realized in the beginning that this was not some weird kind of blood cancer, that this was simply not eating. So put them together, a cost of a pizza and beer every month. $20? We'll keep a yogi fed. Most of them are yoginis, mostly women. We got a few guys who have not chosen to live in the monastery, but chosen to do practice on the mountain and here and there. Some in the Nagpa Nagmo robes, and some who are in monks' robes, who hold the vows. Many of them do really well. Gelong Dorji, amazing practitioner up in the caves for at least 50 years now, little cave. He just died a few months ago and sat Tudam for a week, which is very impressive. He was suspended between life and death. The heartbeat stops, the breathing stops, but you're not quite dead. And you can stay like that for a week, where the body doesn't rot, no rigor mortis, no morbid lividity, just suspended, but no breathing, no heartbeat. Sitting in meditation. A few Westerners have done that too, Tudam. Not that many. I know of 2. I'm sure there's a few more here and there scattered about. If you want a yogi, come see me after the talking. Look through my photos. Pick one that you feel for. I'll introduce you. You'll have your own yogi to work with. Write to. Support in retreat. Receive the blessings of the practice of. It's a real jumpstart for your practice if you're at the time in your life where you don't have enough time to practice as much as you think you should or you'd like. And if you're currently a starving student or retired on a teeny little fixed income, this is probably not the right choice for you. Practice. You have time. Do your own. But if you want some help, have a yogi. I also run a medical fund where I buy medicine for the sick ones. Actually, mostly that comes out of my pocket, but some other people stick money in my pocket for that purpose. And I keep it separate. I spend that money, and then when it runs out, it comes out of my pocket. Because we've got a bunch of diabetics and a couple with lupus, autoimmune. They need regular meds. They can't afford it. Asthma. Air pollution has been a problem in India. Cooking over a smoky wood fire can be a problem in India. Cow dung is your fuel. And twigs. So if you want to take part in this, come see me after. I'll be around. Does that answer?
Yes, thank you.
All lamas have some group somewhere that they look after. It's what being a Lama means for a Tibetan. I'm not considered a good Lama because I teach well by the Tibetans. I'm a good Lama according to the Tibetans because I look after my people. That's what Lamas are for. You look after them spiritually, physically. I give them teachings. I feed them or get them fed. If that's what they need, I give them teachings. If that's what they need, that's called looking after. That's the duty of a Lama. Look after your peeps. Make sure they can practice, and if what they need to practice is food, arrange the food. Work it out. They don't feed Lamas the good food just, for shits and grins. It's because they're hoping that they'll do this, look after them. Realize, dear Lama, that your peeps that you're supposed to be looking after, they're all life in the universe, not just one little group. That's the other important part. Are we complete? A last word for y'all. Most important thing, practice. Milarepa's last word to his disciple was to pick up his robes and show his calloused ass, a thing I'm not about to do for you in this moment because I don't feel like it. Nonetheless, the meaning of that, the thing that will free you into the totality of yourself, who you really are, which is bigger than who you think you are. Practice.